no, not so much as a slight wagging of, his great fat double chin, which at these times, as at all others, remained a perfect desert in the broad map of his face, one changeless, dull, tremendous blank. Lest it should be matter of surprise to any that Mr. Willet adopted this bold course in opposition to one whom he had often entertained, and who had always paid his way at the Maypole gallantly, it may be remarked that it was his very penetration and sagacity in this respect which occasioned him to indulge in those unusual demonstrations of jocularity just now recorded. For Mr. Willet, after carefully balancing father and son in his mental scales, had arrived at the distinct conclusion that the old gentleman was a better sort of a customer than the young one. Throwing his landlord into the same scale, which was already turned by this consideration, and heaping upon him again his strong desires to run counter to the unfortunate Joe, and his opposition as a general principle to all matters of love and matrimony, it went down to the very ground straightway, and sent the light cause of the younger gentleman flying upwards to the ceiling. Mr. Chester was not the kind of man to be by any means dim-sighted to Mr. Willet's motives, but he thanked him as graciously as if he had been one of the most disinterested martyrs that ever shone on earth, and leaving him with many complimentary reliances on his great taste and judgment, to prepare whatever dinner he might deem most fitting the occasion, bent his steps towards the Warren. Dressed with more than his usual elegance, assuming a gracefulness of manner which, though it was the result of long study, sat easily upon him and became him well, composing his features into their most serene and prepossessing expression, and setting, in short, that guard upon himself at every point which denoted that he attached no slight importance to the impression he was about to make, he entered the bounds of Miss Haredale's usual walk. He had not gone far, or looked about him long, when he descried coming towards him a female figure. A glimpse of the form and dress as she crossed a little wooden bridge which lay between them satisfied him that he had found her whom he desired to see. He threw himself in her way, and a very few paces brought them close together. He raised his hat from his head, and yielding the path suffered her to pass him. Then, as if the idea had but that moment occurred to him, he turned hastily back, and said in an agitated voice, "I beg pardon, do I address Miss Haredale?" She stopped in some confusion at being so unexpectedly accosted by a stranger, and answered, "Yes." "Something told me," he said, looking a compliment to her beauty, "that it could be no other. Miss Haredale, I bear a name which is not unknown to you, which it is a pride and yet a pain to me to know sounds pleasantly in your ears. I am a man advanced in life, as you see. I am the father of him whom you honour and distinguish above all other men. May I, for weighty reasons which fill me with distress, beg but a minute's conversation with you here?" Who that was inexperienced in deceit, and had a frank and youthful heart, could doubt the speaker's truth? Could doubt it, too, when the voice that spoke was like the faint echo of one she knew so well, and so much loved to hear? She inclined her head, and stopping, cast her eyes upon the ground. "A little more apart, among these trees. It is an old man's hand, Miss Haredale, an honest one, believe me." She put hers in it as he said these words, and suffered him to lead her to a neighbouring seat. "You alarm me, sir," she said in a low voice. "You are not the bearer of any ill news, I hope?" "Of none that you anticipate," he answered, sitting down beside her. "Edward is well, quite well. It is of him I wish to speak, certainly, but I have no misfortune to communicate." She bowed her head again, and made as though she would have begged him to proceed, but said nothing. "I am sensible that I speak to you at a disadvantage, dear Miss Haredale. Believe me that I am not so forgetful of the feelings of my younger days as not to know that you are little disposed to view me with favour. You have heard me described as cold-hearted, calculating, selfish—" "I have never, sir," she interposed with an altered manner and a firmer voice, "I have never heard you spoken of in harsh or disrespectful terms. You do a great wrong to Edward's nature if you believe him capable of any mean or base proceeding." "Pardon me, my sweet young lady, but your uncle—" "Nor is it my uncle's nature either," she replied, with a heightened colour in her cheek. "It is not his nature to stab in the dark, nor is it mine to love such deeds." She rose as she spoke, and would have left him, but he detained her with a gentle hand, and besought her in such persuasive accents to hear him but another minute, that she was easily prevailed upon to comply, and so sat down again. "And it is," said Mr. Chester, looking upward and apostrophizing the air, "it is this frank, ingenuous, noble nature, Ned, that you can wound so lightly. Shame, shame upon you, boy!" She turned towards him quickly, and with a scornful look and flashing eyes. There were tears in Mr. Chester's eyes, but he dashed them hurriedly away, as though unwilling that his weakness should be known, and regarded her with mingled admiration and compassion. "I never until now," he said, "believed that the frivolous actions of a young man could move me like these of my own son. I never knew till now the worth of a woman's heart, which boys so lightly win and lightly fling away. Trust me, dear young lady, that I never until now did know your worth, and though an abhorrence of deceit and falsehood has impelled me to seek you out, and would have done so had you been the poorest and least gifted of your sex, I should have lacked the fortitude to sustain this interview could I have pictured you to my imagination as you really are." Oh, if Mrs. Varden could have seen the virtuous gentleman as he said these words, with indignation sparkling from his eyes, if she could have heard his broken, quavering voice, if she could have beheld him as he stood bareheaded in the sunlight, and with unwonted energy poured forth his eloquence. With a haughty face, but pale and trembling too, Emma regarded him in silence. She neither spoke nor moved, but gazed upon him as though she would look into his heart. "I throw off," said Mr. Chester, "the restraint which natural affection would impose on some men, and reject all bonds but those of truth and duty. Miss Haredale, you are deceived. You are deceived by your unworthy lover and my unworthy son." Still she looked at him steadily, and still said not one word. "I have ever opposed his professions of love for you. You will do me the justice, dear Miss Haredale, to remember that. Your uncle and myself were enemies in early life, and if I had sought retaliation I might have found it here. But as we grow older we grow wiser. Bitter, I would fain hope. And from the first I have opposed him in this attempt. I foresaw the end, and would have spared you if I could." "Speak plainly, sir," she faltered. "You deceive me, or are deceived yourself. I do not believe you. I cannot. I should not." "First," said Mr. Chester soothingly, "for there may be in your mind some latent angry feeling to which I would not appeal, pray take this letter. It reached my hands by chance and by mistake, and should have accounted to you, as I am told, for my son's not answering some other note of yours. God forbid, Miss Haredale," said the good gentleman with great emotion, "that there should be in your gentle breast one causeless ground of quarrel with him. You should know, and you will see, that he was in no fault here. There appeared something so very candid, so scrupulously honourable, so very truthful and just in this course, something which rendered the upright person who resorted to it so worthy of belief, that Emma's heart for the first time sunk within her. She turned away and burst into tears. "I would," said Mr. Chester, leaning over her and speaking in mild and quite venerable accents, "I would, dear girl, if it were my task to banish, not increase, those tokens of your grief. My son, my erring son—I will not call him deliberately criminal in this, for men so young, who have been inconstant twice or thrice before, act without reflection, almost without a knowledge of the wrong they do—will break his plighted faith to you, has broken it even now. Shall I stop here, and having given you this warning leave it to be fulfilled, or shall I go on?" "You will go on, sir," she answered, "and speak more plainly yet, in justice both to him and me." "My dear girl," said Mr. Chester, bending over her more affectionately still, "whom I would call my daughter, but the fates forbid, Edward seeks to break with you upon a false and most unwarrantable pretence. I have it on his own showing, in his own hand. Forgive me if I have had a watch upon his conduct. I am his father. I had a regard for your peace and his honour, and no better resource was left me. There lies on his desk at this present moment, ready for transmission to you, a letter in which he tells you that our poverty, his and mine, Miss Haredale, forbids him to pursue his claim upon your hand; in which he offers, voluntarily proposes, to free you from your pledge, and talks magnanimously—men do so very commonly in such cases—of being in time more worthy of your regard, and so forth. A letter, to be plain, in which he not only jilts you—pardon the word, I would summon to your aid your pride and dignity—not only jilts you, I fear, in favour of the object whose slighting treatment first inspired his brief passion for yourself,